something that I love. I'm quite a visual person. Are there many visual people in this room? Fairly visual? Yeah? Right, so if you know who you are, and you may do some of this already, because actually you find visual people do tend to use this technique, but maybe not to the sort of style and technique that I'm going to talk about now. But actually there is a lot of evidence to support the fact that mental practice is a very powerful tool for enhancing performance. In fact, there's an argument, I think in the 1984, there was an academic called Driscoll, he actually worked with footballers, and his conclusion was mental practice combined with physical practice had a more powerful effect on performance than either mental practice or physical practice alone. So his advice was that if you're going to practice mentally, you do it in conjunction with physical practice, and it can actually very much enhance performance. So some examples of sportsmen who use mental practice and imagery. I work with a psychologist on imagery training. Sometimes when I'm driving to a ground and sitting in traffic, I do a couple of crosses in my mind. David James, England, well, not in last World Cup so much, but David James, England goalkeeper.
What's a cross in that case?
It would be basically when he's...
a football cross.
It's a football cross.
Not a religious one.
Into religion, you're right.
You said that you should combine mental practice with physical practice.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of how?
Right, well I'm going to actually, what I would do is, I've actually got technique that, an actual template that you can go through. So I'll just maybe answer that in a second and see if I've answered your question. But other performers, these are actually, I had a classical music background. I played a lot of piano as a kid, but my story is that I was a lot of expectation I was going to be a concert pianist, but actually I never did because I got fearful performance anxiety, absolutely terrible. Crippling to the point that beat blockers and all sorts, and there's a lot of musicians like this. So it's actually incredible that there are, I see a musician on the stage and I still get the fits, thinking, my God, you're amazing. Vladimir Ashkenazy and Igor are both classical musicians. Ashkenazy was somebody I grew up listening to a lot, but he's a Russian pianist. But he's using mental imagery on the stage, as is Igor, and they're both admitting to nerves, which is actually quite reassuring in hindsight. But the idea being that they're on the stage and they're imagining how they perform in concerts and something unexpected. So all kinds of issues like conductor goes off or it's not gone according to rehearsal. But to go back to your point, because I think this is perhaps what might be useful for you, but do let me know if I need to clarify. But again, going back to some of the research in terms of mental practice, there has been techniques to show that if it's as specific as possible, it is most effective. So if you're going to go into another room and sort of daydream for a couple of minutes, it's probably not going to be very effective, but there was actually a model called PETSLAP. It's still probably not the easiest acronym to remember, but essentially when you're doing mental practice, you're trying to recreate the environment as close as possible. So for instance, for today, if I was doing mental practice for this talk today, I would want to imagine myself how I'd be standing in front of an audience and the tools I'll be using, so it might be this and the projector. I'd want to be imagining real-time the emotions that I'm experiencing. I want to feel confident, or I want to feel, maybe I go back to that model before we're talking about, but those kind of emotions that I want to evoke in performance. Time specific. So I'm imagining it in the same kind of time frame and time speed that I would actually be doing it now. Task specific. Again, making sure that I'm not walking around the room, it's not about preparation, it's about me speaking. Learning as well is another factor. Mental practice is one of those interesting scenarios where actually if you're mentally imagining a scenario, it's effective for 2 weeks, and then after that it has less of an effect on performance, so you need to keep adapting your mental practice and the kind of imagery. Maybe you focus on a specific element of performance and not the whole performance, for instance. Or as you develop in competency in what you're doing over time, or There are different scenarios that crop up in performance. So for instance, someone says, I don't like what you're saying at the back, get off the stage. I can start adapting that into my routines. Not that I think anybody would do that, but you know, you get my drift. There's sometimes difficult people in the audience, so how do you factor that into your rehearsal? Environment, making it as closely aligned to the environment as possible. So today it was hard for me to imagine what an environment would be like, you know, what rooming was exactly, but I could imagine a general hotel room, for instance, and the kind of conference room it might be in. And finally, perspective. So when we talk about perspective, it's first person or third person. So I'm either looking at myself or I'm doing it real time. I do this a lot. I quite like this technique. But I tend to interject between first and first. It's like different video things.
If I could just
Yeah.
contribute a little, just
Yeah, of course.
from the neuroscience,
Yeah.
which is what I specialise in, is that an individual neuron doesn't know the difference between actuality and imagination.
Right.
But what we have is we have what's called the premotor area and the motor area. And when you imagine something, the premotor area informs the motor area about the activity. But when you actually physically do it, the motor area informs the premotor area, and they work together. So that's just a bit of the neuroscience.
Yeah.
So in other words, she's right. Yeah, absolutely. No, but of course you know why, but just supporting
absolutely.
it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you see, if I was looking at learning perspective, you know, if I'd take that in, and that would build my confidence over time, because you know, you get some positive feedback, and that energy was supported. So that learning one is a little bit of a tricky one. I always find it hard to actually describe that, but that's the kind of example I might go, where I go, good feedback, well that's probably going to, you know, how would I react to it in the future?